about philosopher of the day is Jean-Paul Sartre, and just by way of kind of recontextualizing things, we're talking about the issue of ethics and the different categories that influence our attitudes towards ethics. And certainly we began with economics, and we talked about Adam Smith and Karl Marx, and then we looked at psychology, the psychology of Freud, and then one of his most astounding disciples, R.D. Laing. And last week I introduced philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre as an entry point into a discussion of how power influences our attitude towards ethics. And today I'm going to continue that. Now, if you look in the textbooks on political philosophy or studies of sociology, or you probably won't find Jean-Paul Sartre's name listed there. He's not considered to be a political philosopher. It's kind of paradoxical in a way, because Sartre is actually one of the most trenchant voices when it comes to understanding the reality of power and our experience of it. Most of the time, Sartre is, considered as one of the leading proponents of existentialist philosophy. Now, you might remember last class we used Sartre's own definition, kind of a ready-at-hand definition. Excuse me. Existentialism as a philosophy where existence precedes essence. So, that's kind of a truism that we'll spend some time unpacking here today. Sartre, very interesting life, one of the most interesting figures of the 20th century for lots of reasons. He was born around 1905 and experienced most of the trauma that the continent served up in the 20th century. And he was a part of all of the major debates that went on in the 20th century, big debates over, the nature of communism and capitalism, and just a very active writer, wrote on theater, wrote criticism, and wrote some amazing works of philosophy as well. He passed away, he died in 1980. Always interesting to take a look at who shows up at the funeral of a famous person. When Sartre died in 1980, most of the young people of Paris turned out to mourn him. He had a particular affinity, and young people had an affinity for his philosophy as well, because his philosophy is first and foremost a deeply rooted critique of all of the ideologies that humanity has had to deal with that have enslaved people in their thinking and in their everyday lives since antiquity. So, and young people have a handle on that because, for in large measure they occupy a unique position in society. As students, you're part of the society, of course, but you also have this kind of outsider status. So you can see the society in ways that perhaps others do not. And so, Sartre explained the nature of reality in such a way that is very appealing to young people. His words, he has the distinct honor of having written a very powerful analysis of both anti-Semitism and anti-Islamophobia, right? So one of his works, Anti-Semite and Jew, really delved deeply into the well springs of anti-Semitism, and so that was really powerful. At the same time, he was a staunch champion of working class people in the Middle East, and sided with the Algerians in their war of liberation against the Algerian government, and also was a supporter of movements of liberation in the 20th century, which put him at odds with both the French government and the United States to a certain point. Uh, his interest in literature was quite amazing. He was a gifted writer. His book Nausea, which is an existential novel, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1964. But his plays are also just part of the canon. When people have had it with their neighbors or with other family members, they'll frequently invoke Sartre and a famous line from his play No Exit, that hell is the other. So he is a deeply rooted part of the culture. And today we're going to talk about his philosophy and why I think his philosophy is particularly important for understanding how power is exercised over us, and how we liberate ourselves from that. So he begins, he was a student of the German philosophers Edmund Husserl and to a lesser extent Martin Heidegger. Husserl pioneered this idea of intentionality, which is a core concept of Sartre. And what does he mean by that? Well, it refers to the idea that whenever we're conscious of something. Okay, so kind of a curious thing. Whenever I'm conscious of something. Right now, for example, I'm looking at my 35 millimeter camera over on the bar next to my table here, and that's the content of my consciousness. That pretty much defines what it is that I'm thinking of. And for Sartre, that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, because of course the camera's not in my psyche; it's over there on the table, and my consciousness is always conscious of objects, but I myself am not an object, right? So that's kind of an odd thing. And if I try to represent myself to myself, I can only do so under the aegis of presenting myself as an object. So I'm always kind of ahead of myself. I'm always, looking at myself as this kind of other. And, and yet at the same time, that defines the contents of my consciousness. So as he famously puts it in one of his articles, consciousness finds itself in the situation, if you will, where it is born dependent on a substance, on an object that is alien to itself. And somehow we have to, come to terms with that. So how does this happen? How do we deal with this? Well, we don't identify with the objects that we're conscious of. In fact, being identified as an object is kind of the death knell for us as a vital human being. And Sartre goes on to show that we do this all the time, right? We try to pretend that we are objective, that we're not this consciousness that's fleeing from objectivity. And so we'll come up with phrases such as, I'm not that person, or I could never do this, that's not me. Well, Sartre would say, no, actually, you are that person, or you could be. And yes, you are actually free. You may think or you may pretend that you're a stone or something like that, you can't act in a certain way, but absolutely you can. Each one of us can right now, maybe some of you have actually already done this, get up and go, off in a completely different direction and change things out completely in that way. As I said, I think in an earlier occasion, one of the interesting things about when you go to college, especially if you're not living at home, is that, sometimes, students will come from a place where just about everything about them is known. They know their biography, People in their town know what you like to have for lunch. They know your whole story, and that can be a nice thing. It can be a source of security, perhaps, but can also be a burden, right? Everybody knows everything about you, and and that could be a tough slog. Well, what a lot of students find when they come to college is they go to the city, the New York City. It's the city, of course, and they're whoever they want to be. See, because in the city nobody knows you. You're anonymous, and that can be painful in some ways, but it also can be extremely liberating. Now, how is it possible to do that if we're not actually free to be whoever it is we want to be? And that's difficult, right? We have to somehow, when people know us, we have to carry all this baggage with us. So, but Sartre saying, no, you actually do not have to carry that baggage with you. You are actually free to make this kind of radical turnaround. For those of you who are interested in a literary approach to just this aspect of Sartre's philosophy, of course, he unpacks this in his novel Nausea. But another interesting book which kind of goes into this is called The Sheltering Sky by Bowles. In there he plays with this idea of people who believed that they had these fixed identities, these fixed personas, and then discovered in a situation that they actually didn't, and they kind of are forced by circumstances to reinvent themselves. So we have this twofold thing. We have this radical freedom on the one hand. At the same time, we sometimes find that disconcerting. And so we'll try to pretend that we're not as free as we actually are, because freedom, in this kind of sense, is actually quite a bit of a burden. How do I, it's exhausting to face the responsibility that comes with choosing all the time. And so, it's very comforting to say, no, this is off the table because, I'm not that person, as I said. Sartre calls that attempt to hide our freedom from ourselves bad faith. Now, bad faith isn't necessarily lying to oneself. It's more about pretending that one is an essential thing, that one has some kind of essentialized self. Earlier I referenced the students who I've had over the years who seemed like they were on just a kind of a mediocre academic track and that's being generous, right? And only to see them achieve these amazing heights, right? And so we do see that people have this capacity to supersede whoever they are at any particular circumstance. And right now you're sitting in a class, philosophy class, or you're watching this philosophy video, but you can imagine yourself as other than you currently are. See, that's a really interesting feature of the human condition. And Sartre delves into that, and he wants us to really put freedom at the forefront of our ethics. Now, for Sartre, there's a kind of what he calls as odd and kind of off-putting word. It's called the ontological proof. Now, it sounds strange because we think of ontology and the existence of God. This has nothing to do with that. For Sartre, it's we have a prior understanding of reality, and this is what sets up our deep transparency to ourselves. So if you think about it, as one scholar put it, when I go to the other room and I grab the door handle, the doorknob, I already know what to do with the doorknob, right? I have a prior comportment toward the doorknob. It's not like I'm thinking in my head, oh, there's a doorknob, let me grasp it. No, of course, it doesn't work that way. It's a precognition. So I have this level of awareness that's precognitive. Sartre uses the term French, the pre-reflective cogito, right? Cogito is actually a Latin term that traces to Descartes. So a pre-reflective cogito is an understanding that comes from our just simply being here in the world, right? As Heidegger is one of his influences, put it. So, are there other examples? Well, in his book, Being in Nothingness, Sartre uses a really interesting example, which kind of dates us all. He talks about, how many how many cigarettes do I have in my pocket, right? And if you smoke, there's a constant obsession is how many cigarettes do I have. So he says, well, I don't have to check in my pocket because I know I have about half a pack of cigarettes. And so it's did I count the cigarettes? No, I know because I know from this level of awareness that I have that's pre-reflective. My pre-reflective cogito knows this. And as I said in our example, I think last week, if you think about parking or parallel parking a car, you don't okay, I'm going to measure this now, and I'm going to no. You look at the car, you look at the space, and your pre-reflective cogito allows you to see that your comportment is fine because you're extended now into the car. When you're driving the car, it's not like, okay, my brain is here, the car is here, no, it's not like that. You are kind of an openness in the car. You're open to the car, so the car is kind of like sort of like clothing that you're wearing, right? And you're just kind of maneuvering this extended field that is yourself into the parking space. And if you think about great athletes, great artists, great dancers, for example, Nureyev. When you see Nureyev dance, it's not like he's, okay, I'm going to measure the movement that I'm going to make. No, it's not that at all. Years of practice have given him the facility to, make certain movements on the stage. But when he steps on the stage, he's one with that stage. He's a part of the field that includes the stage. Great football players, if you ever have the opportunity to see a great performer on the football field, right? A great runner or something like that, or they don't think in their head, okay, now I'm going to measure, how high I have to jump to catch this. No, it's not that. They kind of know, and their body is sort of one with the football field or the ice hockey rink or the basketball. If you watch LeBron James, or back in the day, Dr. J, these great athletes. It's not this relationship that they have to the court that they're in is pre-reflective. They are at one with it. Muhammad Ali, another one. You can just watch these great athletes, and you see that they know before they know, right? They know before they know, and so there's a kind of knowledge that we have just by virtue of the fact that we exist, and it's not to say that we don't subsequently, of course, refine our knowledge and come to greater understandings of things, right? We can fill in these initial experiences and make them richer and more filled out. What does that have to say about the self, and the psyche? What about other people? Well, first of all, let's go back to Freud, for example. Remember that Freud had this idea that there were these two fundamental drives, aggression and sex, and that in societies, this is his thesis in Civilization and its Discontents, these drives have to be repressed, right? So repression is a core concept of Freud's psychology. Well, what about that? Isn't that like some kind of a structure that hides who we are from ourselves? And Sartre looks at this in a major section of his work, Being in Nothingness, and really gets into a substantial debate with Freud over it, and argues that, look, we can't say that there's some kind of structure that defines who we are, because in order for me to repress an idea or an experience, I have to sign off on it. I have to somehow vet it in order to repress it. So now there are answers to that Freud puts, Freudians put in. These experiences happen so early in life that we don't even know that they're there, and so on and so forth. It's an interesting debate. But when we see other people, we have knowledge of them, we learn to know them over time, but we also have this existential experience, or a better word would be encounter. We have an existential encounter with the other. So I see the other because I have this twofold aspect to myself. I'm a thing, I have a body, but I also am a consciousness which has nothing to do with things, right?
Yeah.
And so when I see another person, I make that instantaneous precognitive understanding that that's somebody like me. And Sartre famously says, if I see the eyes, I don't see the existence, right? Because I'm already in an analytical mode if I'm looking at their eyes, what color they are, how much hair they have, and so forth. No, there's a pre-reflective experience, an encounter with the other. And it's kind of dangerous in a way, because I don't know what the encounter with the other is going to be like. It could be wonderful, it could be completely banal, but it also could be dangerous. It could be not dangerous in the sense the person's going to rob me, dangerous in the sense that the other has this unique capacity, because they are also free, radically free, they are completely free to negate me. They can take up a stance where they're going to not recognize me as a free self, right? They can turn me into an object. They can, we have phrases, right? They can completely objectify me, right? Could turn me into an object, a use value of some sort, or try to exploit me or something, use me in that way. So so that's all going on when we first meet someone. And let's play it out, okay? Let's suppose we're crossing, the quad, the imaginary quad someplace. Once upon a time that used to exist on a college campus. And I pass by you and I don't recognize you. I just look right through you. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's disrespectful. It's this, it's that, it's all kinds of things. But what's up with Professor Carney? He looked right through me, didn't recognize me. And it's unsettling at a deeper level, because it's that level of precognition, that level of being in the world. I negated you as a person. I treated you like a thing. See, I treated you like an it. There was a wonderful rabbi by the name of Martin Buber, who did a work off of this called I and Thou, and talks about the ethics of mutual recognition, how important it is to see our fellow brothers and sisters as thous and not as its. Although sometimes in life, if I'm going to the doctor and I want him to, do something for me, I do have, kind of an I-it relationship, but it's purely practical. I'm still recognizing the doctor as another free existence, you see. So that raises some kind of quite a few ethical questions and a great deal of ambiguity, right? When I encounter the other, I just don't know if they're going to accept me. Are they playing me? You have this wonderful expression, right? Are they playing me, or are they recognizing, my freedom and selfhood? So we're free. The other represents a bit of a challenge for us, because we don't know when we encounter them how that's going to go. But Sartre plays this out very interestingly in his play that I mentioned earlier, No Exit, right? Where we have these characters in a room, and they don't know how they look, how they appear, because there are no mirrors in this room. And it has this, what Sartre considered really kind of, horrible furniture, and they're just all wondering where in God's name they are. And then at a certain point, the devil appears as the butler and tells them, well, of course, you're in hell, right? So, but what's that about, really? Well, it's about the idea that the other has this power to negate me, to get inside me, and to torture myself in a way that no force of nature actually can. So we have, a great deal of power. Um, the other interesting aspect of Sartre's philosophy here is that because of this emphasis on our radical freedom, and that we're not some kind of object like a stone or something, there's no way that we can pretend that we have neutrality. We have to choose whether we want to or not, and oftentimes, even in not choosing, we actually are choosing. So I use the example a couple of times that if I say if I'm a graduating senior, and seniors experience a lot of existential dread, right? What direction am I going to go in life? And so I go to my professor of politics, who's also the legal studies advisor, and I say, well, what do you think? Should I take the LSATs? Should I go to law school, or do you think I should, take this job with this company or this organization? Well, Sartre would say, or from a Sartrean point of view, the very decision to ask the legal studies advisor what I should do itself reflects a prior discussion, a prior decision, right? And so many of our conversations, so many of our decisions are made at the pre-reflective level, and then we do go all kinds of gymnastics to kind of talk ourselves out of that. It's kind of close, although I wouldn't want to stress it too much, to the idea in psychology of the adaptive unconscious, which was written about in a book that came out some time ago called Blink. And it's this idea that, we do know, and oftentimes we talk ourselves out of it. I think thinking fast and slow also gets into this, right? That there's a kind of thinking that is more reasoned, but oftentimes, it can also lead us astray as well. Although, thinking slow also is very important, especially if you're, trying to make very substantial decisions, right? And so there's a lot of aspects to this business of existential ethics, and where does the existential component come in? Well, the most important thing is that we have to stop playing ourselves, right? We have to stop BSing ourselves, that we don't have the freedom that we actually have. Once we sign on to that, once we recognize that, then we have a problem. We have to recognize that our decisions are all ethical decisions, because we're making ourselves through the different choices that we make. And so absolutely we can't say that, well, it's because my advisor told me to do this, or because my parents told me to do this that I did. No. That might work at a certain age when you're growing up, but at once one has their full agency in view, you might not be free to act, but certainly you know what the consequences are if you know how actually free you really are. So some other works that Sartre turned his attention to. He was also a very active political figure, and edited a newspaper, Le Temps Modernes. He wrote quite a bit in that of issues of the day, and engaged, although he was never a member of the Communist Party, he did write a lot about the plight of the intellectual, in a kind of binary world where the two choices were the Soviet Union and its Stalinist kind of system, and the United States with its capitalist political economy and ideology of the individual. And so a good deal of his political writings were really about exploring, the strange position that the ethical individual, the intellectual finds themselves in, right? Because on the one hand, a playwright or a novelist like Sartre is also parasitic on the society in which they live, right? They're dependent upon editors and the money that they bring. On the other hand, like students, they see the society, in a different light. So the artist has a unique role in society, and oftentimes, they're ostracized and they're outsiders because what they're seeing in the society, are the seamy dimensions of it, the undemocratic, the totalitarian aspects, the inhuman aspects of it, and they're drawing attention to that with their art, if they're serious artists, that is. And so what is their status? This question really drew Sartre to his writings, again and again. And the artist for Sartre has to walk a kind of middle way. And so Sartre was equally critical of the inequalities of American capitalism as he was the brutality of Stalinist communism. And by Stalinist communism, I mean the residue of Stalinism that was retained in the Soviet Union after Stalin passed away and was denounced by Khrushchev in his famous speech. So Sartre felt that look, there's this unique position that we're in as thinkers, as philosophers, as artists. We're part of the society, but we're really not all in on it because we have this other kind of muse that we have to follow, or we have an ethical conscience. And so for Sartre, there's no question but that we can't be neutral. And just so much of life insists that we take a neutral stand, but we can't. Every decision that I make reflects a prior decision that I already did make. So own it, I guess, would be a fair way to sum up that, and to avoid as much as possible the siren song of bad faith, the idea that we are an object and not a free peregrinal-like entity in the world. So I'm going to stop here, and we'll continue our discussion about Sartre, and maybe next week, we'll bring up some additional topics. But that will be it for now. Excuse me one second.